The European Union's been, it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
What another remarkable claim by Donald Trump. In the last week or so, we've seen him claim that Volodymyr Zelensky is a dictator, and this huge diplomatic spat between the United States and Ukraine that might be actually to a certain extent resolved in the next day or so with a rare earths deal potentially been signed. I have the last video about that topic. And here we have Donald Trump getting into a diplomatic spat with the European Union, accusing it of having been born to screw over the United States. This is in the context of Donald Trump threatening to impose a 25% tariff on goods coming into the United States from the European Union. So what is the truth? Why was the European Union formed? And in the context of trade negotiations, can it actually screw over the United States? So normally I start these videos with Privyt, but since this topic is a little bit different, I can say bonjour, guten tag. And my name is Connor Klein, and I'm an expert in international relations. I actually worked as a lawyer for the European Commission, the EU institutions, many years ago. So definitely in this video, I'm here to give you a little bit more nuanced and insightful analysis of what is going on, normally in the Russo-Ukrainian war, but this is obviously in a broader context of European-US relations. So why was the European Union formed? There was a precursor. It was called the European Steel and Coal Community. That was back in 1952. And ironically, considering Donald Trump's claim in that clip I played for you, the United States actually encouraged the creation of the European Steel and Coal Community. It was, to a certain extent, symbolic because many European wars have been fought over resources, and France and Germany being part of this European Steel and Coal Community that would then have a community for two different resources that were the instigators for many of the wars between France and Germany and the broader continent. That was something that the US was very supportive of, in particular because if you think back to the early 1950s, we're in the early stages of the Cold War, and basically the European countries that were in the US sphere of influence, so not under the control of Moscow, while then coordinating things and having less disputes amongst them, was definitely in the United States' interest, and they basically were cheerleaders for the creation of this community. Things then developed. There were 6 countries in the beginning in this steel and coal community. They were France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Italy. Then they went deeper in terms of integration, and the Treaty of Rome was signed in 1957, and they created the European Economic Community. And then that allowed for more integration in terms of trade between the different peoples in those countries. There were just 6 countries in the beginning. That then expanded with the first enlargement of this bloc to include the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Denmark in 1973. And up until the fall of communism in obviously the very beginning of the early 90s, they had Greece, Spain, and Portugal join when those countries had shaken off the dictatorships that had been in charge there earlier on in previous decades. So the European Union had been expanding a little bit, becoming deeper in terms of integration, and then in the early 90s you had the creation of the European Union that then expanded. The integration was political, economic, cultural. It is not purely an economic union or a trading group. It is a fully fledged economic or political entity, a polity, and basically that is the current structure. It is a mixture of a federation with a confederation, so it's not as federalized as, say, the United States is, and it is that kind of polity and is not just purely a trading bloc, which was the genesis of the project, the European project. So you're probably aware that we have Brexit, so the United Kingdom has left the European Union. However, many more countries have joined. With the end of the Cold War, we have Finland, Sweden, and Austria join because they have been previously neutral, so they didn't join the European Union. At the time, it was obviously still the EEC. And then with countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and a few others like Cyprus and Malta, they joined in 2004, 2007, and even in 2013 we had Croatia joining. So much of that has joined. They are no longer in the sphere of influence of Moscow, so they made a beeline to join the European Union. So what does all that mean? This mean in terms of the dispute or the hyperbole from Donald Trump? Because it's clear it was not created or born to screw over the United States. Actually, the United States was, massively in favor of it, because it also solved a very important problem for the United States that was summed up by Henry Kissinger, who was the US Secretary of State at the time. He said, who do I call if I want to speak to Europe? Because there was all these countries with all their foreign ministers and prime ministers and presidents, and he just wanted to call and say, what does Europe think? And there was no coordinated position, and there were just all these people you'd have to speak to, and it wasn't very efficient. European Union is in part an answer to that, because the countries pool their sovereignty and they make collective decisions, not for everything. Some things are then left to the individual member states. That is why it is a mixture of a federation and a confederation, but it does help with that. It hasn't gone far enough to actually have one person you need to call with a coordinated position. However, trade is a competency that is decided in Brussels. It is not decided by the individual member states, and that has a big effect on how the United States actually deals with the European Union in terms of trade, because these countries collectively, they form a very big market and trading bloc, very similar to the United States and China. Those three entities or countries or polities, they have a lot of negotiating power and leverage over all the other countries. However, vis-a-vis each other, they're pretty well balanced, so they can't really bully each other around. However, they can when they have to deal with other countries, and we've seen that recently with Mexico and the US, for example, where there is a big imbalance in trade, and to a certain extent with Canada. The United Kingdom will also be in a relatively weak position if we were negotiating with the European Union post-Brexit, or if they wanted to have some sort of free trade with the United States. The United States would be in a very strong position because it's a lot bigger economically. So therein lies the problem for Donald Trump. He cannot, in reality, bully the European Union to the same extent that he could with, say, Canada and Mexico in his recent tariff wars that were a little bit more like a kabuki theater, because they were imposed, then there were retaliatory tariffs from Canada, for example, and suddenly they were all suspended. However, they are being periodically reviewed. So there is this tension in the trade relationship between Canada and the United States in particular. And Donald Trump said that he would impose a 25% tariff on products coming from the European Union into the United States. So the European Commission has already replied that they will impose retaliatory tariffs. That is legal in international trade law, something actually I worked on in general when I was at the European Commission. And basically under the WTO rules, that is World Trade Organization, you can impose retaliatory tariffs to a commensurate value that the United States is imposing tariffs on the European Union in this case. So that is, in general, bad for both sides when you have these tariff wars, because products become a lot more expensive overall for the consumers in both places. However, there are vested interests in both sides that could benefit. So you could have individual companies that would benefit from the tariffs, and then they lobby for them. And Donald Trump seems to have a policy of using the threat of tariffs in terms of trying to extract better deals or better conditions with the different countries that the US obviously does business with. But overall, generally, it is a loss for the countries. There can be reasons to impose tariffs, legitimate reasons like anti-dumping, which is quite technical outside the scope of this video. That's actually the particular area that I worked on. Or you could have a strategic industry that you really need to protect, because maybe if you have a lot of trade with a country, then becomes a potential adversary, not just maybe a rival, but an adversary that can be very problematic for national security. So there are reasons and particular cases where you could impose tariffs and it would make sense. However, in this case where it's just a blanket tariff, it doesn't seem to be good for the US consumers or for European Union consumers and businesses that may be happening very soon. So there, in short, you see the reasons perhaps for why Donald Trump made that accusation and used that hyperbole by saying it was born out of reasons to screw over the United States. From his point of view, it's a little bit of projection because it makes it hard for him to screw over the European Union. The fact that the countries have pooled their trading sovereignty to Brussels, and that means they can't pick off individual member states. Like, you can't go to Spain and say, okay, now you give me a deal, where Spain is a lot smaller than the United States, because they're already negotiating at EU level. And therein you have the reason for the little bit of trade conflict at the moment. So hope you enjoyed that slightly different video. It is in the grander scheme of what has been happening in the Russo-Ukrainian war, because diplomatic relations between the United States under this new Trump administration and the European Union, the individual European countries like Germany, France, UK, and in particular with Ukraine, have been very fraught in the last few weeks. It is not clear, especially after the vote at the United Nations, where the United States voted with Russia and North Korea against a resolution from Ukraine on the third anniversary of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, whether the United States is still an ally of the European Union. Do we have a collective West, an ally of Ukraine, or does it increasingly view their allies, whether it's even Canada and Mexico, Panama, as being adversaries? They are becoming increasingly hostile in their positions. We saw that also with J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference. He's the US Vice President, where he lectured the European leaders there about freedom of speech and described China and Russia as not the real threat to the European continent, which is rather odd in the context of the biggest war in Europe since World War II, which is the Russo-Ukrainian war, and probably about 1 million people either being casualties of that war, dead and injured. So definitely we live in unprecedented times since World War II, and this EU trade war with the United States potentially also plays into that. So drop me a comment down below in the description to this video, or not the description, but the comment section down below. Let me know what you think of what Donald Trump has said. And also check out the links in the description. There you will see some actually have a guidance stuff for going to Ukraine. But most importantly, subscribe to this channel. It is a new channel. And give the video a like and share with someone who might get some value from watching this video. So on that note, I will say auf Wiedersehen, au revoir,